Welcome to the Screaming Blackbird podcast. In this show, we will talk with military officers and professional leaders to explore Air Force careers and engage in leadership dialogue. The Screaming Blackbird podcast is created by the cadets at Air Force ROTC, Detachment 605 at North Carolina A&T State University. The contents of this show are for educational and entertainment purposes only. They do not contain any official information nor opinions of Air Force ROTC or North Carolina A&T State University.
Appreciate you guys. See ya. See ya.
Welcome, everybody, back to episode 21 of the Screaming Blackbird podcast. I am your host, Cadet Jackson Willis, and today I'm joined by your cadet host, Cadet Eli Boyd, and we have two outstanding guests today. We have Lieutenant Colonel Megan O'Rourke and Master Sergeant Travis Ervine. How are you guys doing today?
I think we're doing pretty well. Thanks for having us.
Terrific. Well, for our first question, we want to get our watchers, listeners, to get to know you guys a little bit better. Would you give a brief bio of yourselves, where you're from, and how you got here?
Yeah. So I grew up just in a small town outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. Post 9/11, just started looking at college options and stuff that were out there, and ended up going to Air Force Academy and deciding that's where I was going to go. After graduating from there, ended up in CISO training, Combat Systems Officer, which is basically just a fancier way of saying navigator. I've flown C-130Hs, I've taught at CISO Schoolhouse, and then cross-trained to AFSOC. I am dual mil with two kids. I married a KC-10 pilot, and so we've kind of navigated the dual mil with kids and flying and whatnot. And so that's honestly a pretty short version of my life.
Awesome.
So I grew up in Connersville, Indiana, a real small town. I decided I wanted to join the Air Force just to be able to get out, be around aircraft. I know I wanted to do college. I wasn't sure how I was going to pay for it, and the Air Force kind of helped lay that roadmap for me. I'm married. I got 4 kids. One's about to become a senior next year, so that's been fun to deal with. I originally started out as comm nav on the EC-130s, and then I cross-trained and became a airborne mission system specialist, and that was my first assignment was in TSOF, and from there I became a command evaluator, and now I'm here at this new unit.
Awesome. So you're both in AFSOC now in Florida, but your career, Lieutenant Colonel O'Rourke, didn't start there. Where did it start?
No, so I started in Air Mobility Command, AMC. And so I dropped C-130Hs. I went and flew at Pope. But at the time, I was also dating my now husband, who flew KC-10s at Travis Air Force Base. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with those locations, you're talking North Carolina, so just down the road from you guys there at Pope Army Airfield, and then Northern California. So we did that for about 3.5 years, got engaged, got married long distance, and then after about 18 months after we got married, we were able to get reassigned down to teach there at the CISO Schoolhouse at NES Pensacola in Florida. From there, we taught for 4 years. We had our first kid, got to fly while pregnant with both of my kiddos, and kind of found my way accidentally into the Air Force. I was looking for into AFSOC, excuse me. And so Air Force Special Operations Command, for those who aren't super familiar with that one.
Right.
And so I happened to go job hunting at an AMC conference called Airlift Tanker Association, and happened to sit next to what turned out to be the command chief of AFSOC, who I was like, oh, that would be awesome. I've always wanted to go. You know, my husband and I would love to cross-train, but we're too old. And luckily, Chief Caruso said, hey, you're not. And that got us looking at that option. And after about another 18 months there trying to get into AFSOC, we were able to cross-train to MC-130Js.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was awesome. I had always kind of wanted to do AFSOC, but I didn't know that much about it, especially even going through navigator training at Randolph. Wasn't super familiar with it. And so I thought about it, wasn't totally, sure what it was. And so it was awesome to get there about 10 years into my career, and I've loved it ever since.
So why did you choose to switch to AFSOC, or was there something specifically that piqued your interest or draw you towards it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, Travis also has a pretty good version of this as well. I think for most of us who are called into the Air Force Special Operations community, so AFSOC, are looking for something a little bit more. For me, I had done 7.5 years really training in these other planes. but hadn't really done the missions that I thought I'd do once I came into the Air Force. And so once I found out that I had the opportunity, and it's kind of that, it's honestly a drive to do something a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging, a little bit more niche. And as a 9-year navigator, 9 years in the Air Force navigator, I really hadn't felt a level of job satisfaction yet. I'd enjoyed what I'd done. I loved instructing. I still like teaching. But I hadn't gone out and done the operations that I thought I might get to do in the military. And I knew AFSOC was an option to do that.
Wow, amazing.
Same question for you, Master Sergeant Ervine.
Well, like I said, I originally started out as comm nav, and we had a mission fall, and I went out there as a maintenance support team to rescue 4 American hostages down in South America with the FARC, and that was back in like 2008, I believe. And I went there, but I saw the flyers get on the plane and go out and execute the mission. And I was like, I want this. That's what I want. I want to fly. I want to be part of that. And that's kind of what like started my journey of like, I want to retrain. And it worked out. Like I retrained, and I found out why in tech school, they're like, hey, I was approached by my career field manager at the time, Chief Dunlap, I believe it was. He was like, hey, you want to go AFSOC? And I was like, yes. Yes, I do. With all my heart, I want to do that. He's like, great. You're going to Okinawa, Japan. I was like, that's awesome.
That easy.
Yeah, but just got fortunate and lucky, and right place, right time for me, and it was great.
That's kind of how it seems when the Air Force, it's based on the needs of the Air Force. So you can put in your interests, but ultimately they tell you where you go. And sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. Are there any experiences you guys had where maybe you didn't get your first choice, but you found out you really enjoyed an assignment?
Yeah. So I'll talk candidly about it. My very first thing I ever did in the Air Force, and I like to joke about this, is fail. And so Air Force Academy, they were like, pilot, pilot, pilot all the way. And I was like, okay, I guess like I'll go be a pilot. That sounds awesome. I got to pilot training and kind of hated it. And I ended up, I had difficulty landing. It was a time period they weren't super focused on retaining pilots. And so I ended up washing out. And I joked that the best thing I ever did was fail, because then I ended up reclassing into combat systems officer, and have loved that ever since. And so it's definitely one of those things, like you make the best of any kind of situation regardless. And sometimes your first choice isn't where you're supposed to be. And life will a lot of times redirect you to where you're supposed to actually be.
Besides the aftermath of Fukushima, what made your experience in Okinawa, your assignment in Okinawa, so memorable?
So yeah, you brought up the Fukushima. When I got to Okinawa, it was a brand new flyer. First time I was there, and I got there like just a few days after the earthquake hit and the tsunami and the Fukushima reactor went. And so like just seeing that was like first time flying, first on station in this event, and just seeing how like AFSOC responded to it as a humanitarian source was like wonderful. But Okinawa is just a beautiful place, and the people and the culture are just amazing, and that really stuck with me. It's just being immersed in another culture and just having that experience. That's why it was so memorable.
Any other memorable assignments? Do you guys have any stories or anything you want to share before we get to your current assignment?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, one of like the coolest things for me, so I joined post 9/11. You have that response after that horrible event where you're like, hey, my country's been attacked. And so when I was back in SLICS, I was part of the retrograde of Iraq back then. Now, yes, we've been back since, but it was pretty cool because at the time we felt like we were kind of closing down that chapter from post 9/11.
Right.
And so my aircraft actually carried the last unit's guidon out, the unit colors. And I found a photo in Foreign Affairs of one of my aircraft tail numbers later on, a few months later, talking about the retrograde from Iraq. And so that was pretty cool. That was back in 2011. Like I said, we've been back, obviously, in Iraq since, but at the time we felt like we were closing a chapter.
Right, yeah, so I understand that both of you are now on new assignments in Florida. So how do you like that? Like, how's your job changed, your mindset changed? What's that like?
So now we're at the 492nd Sotric Det 3R AFSOC outreach, and before that I was a command evaluator for AFSOC. I was at MAGCOM headquarters, and like for enlisted command evaluator at MAGCOM, like that's high up for us. Like man, like I get to evaluate anybody on any platform,
Right.
And so it can be busy and focused like on ops and aircraft. Come over here now, it's like, hey, now we want you to start getting the AFSOC mission and story out there and highlighting just so much more than just this one slice that AFSOC holds. And so changing my mindset to that versus like aircraft, I got to go fly. I got to make sure our like people are qualified to get on these giant machines, multi-million-dollar machines, and not mess it up. To okay, now I got to be in front of people. I got to start like really like convincing people like why AFSOC is the place you want to be.
Right.
And that's just a different mindset.
Yeah. From going from like machine to humans, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's a jump.
Yes, sir. It is.
Yeah, so for me, I taught for a long time, like other students, other navigators out there in the platforms. And so really what they don't inform you is like about 11, 12 years into your career as an officer, you start moving up to the strategic level and you're less focused on that tactical level expertise. You're more focused on getting the big overarching mission done. And even still, my previous assignment was working on MC-130 requirements within the AFSOC staff. That was still very focused on one platform. And so now we're charged with going out. We're honestly here with AFSOC Outreach, just kind of talking to great folks like you, telling people, hey, did you know that there's a special operations side of the Air Force? That's us. Most people know what Navy SEALs are. They know what Army Rangers. Most people don't know what special tactics are, or combat controllers, or special reconnaissance, or special operations aviators. And so just going out and teaching people, that's what we're doing now. And so I am still teaching, but it's very different. And then I'm actually the commander of the unit. So that's a whole different world where now I'm in charge of making sure that, hey, how's your family life doing? Okay, we're taking care of that while balancing making sure that our mission, which is going out and conducting these outreach events, is happening. So very far removed, and I'm no longer as immersed in my MC-130 as I'd like to be.
Awesome.
Yeah.
During some of these outreach events, what are the largest misconceptions or things that people get wrong or don't understand that you need to explain to them?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things we see is people will say AFSPEC warfare, and they automatically assume we're talking about Air Force Special Operations. The term AFSPEC warfare is kind of a recruiting term out there, and it encompasses several career fields, some of which are within AFSOC. And so when we talk AFSPEC warfare, we're talking SEERs, so your survival instructors that are out there. They go and teach us techniques on how to evade and resist and, survive in the wilderness if something wrong ever happens. You've also got your explosive ordnance and disposal, your EOD teams, so SEER and EOD. You've also got your combat controllers and your special reconnaissance. That's really the AFSPEC warfare. But most people use AFSOC and AFSPEC warfare kind of interchangeably. But our special tactics members, the people that fall under the AFSPEC warfare, are only about 7% of AFSOC. And so you've got 21,000 people in AFSOC, and so we've got AFSPEC warfare out there, which is awesome, and we need really talented special tactics members so that we can make sure we go out and do the missions that they need to support. But part of what we're being tasked to do is, hey, there's all these other career fields. We need big air commandos from all walks of life. Doesn't matter if you're a support officer, maintenance, a flyer, like we are all air commandos. Come over to AFSOC and work with us.
Wow. So as cadets here in Air Force ROTC, we're all training to become officers one day. And we understand that we'll be working with enlisted personnel pretty much through our entire careers. In your experience, how has the enlisted officer relationship on active duty been, and how has this really played a role with your time in the Air Force?
So as a good officer, I'm going to defer to my enlisted member here. Go Travis.
Yes.
Honestly, the roles of like enlisted officer, like as you as leaders, it's hard for you all to balance, right? That the need to get the mission done and also not to burn out your people. And I think what makes a great officer, and she's been really good at this too, is like, okay, I need this done, but how are my people doing? And it's not just like at home, but how are they doing professionally in their career? How are we developing them, like, to be able to serve at their best performance in their capacities. So, I mean, and it's trust too, right?
Right.
Like, I trust wholeheartedly that my commander has the mission and my interest moving forward. Like,
Right.
that's really how it works. Yeah, it's just trust and like just working together. And, and from enlisted, like we understand that, this is my chain of command, this is how this works.
Right.
And Yeah, this seems that's really kind of the base of it.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing, so, and I mean, I've been now three different major commands. So AMC is where I started, AATC is where I was there at teaching, and then obviously AFSOC. What I what I really, really value about the AFSOC enlisted is they're very talented, they're very smart. I mean, most of them have college degrees. They've just opted not to go the OTS route
Right.
because they like what they do typically. And so they're very quick to be my sanity check as an officer. And so I'm only as good as honestly my master sergeant serving next to me. And in AFSOC, I've got some pretty awesome ones. And the master sergeants I've got in my unit right now are top notch. And you see that across the community. We give them a little bit more responsibility, and they really rise to that challenge.
That's great.
AFSOC being a major command, a MAGCOM, huge base, working with a lot of folks. Do you guys get the opportunity to work with joint forces, folks in the Army or the Navy, things like that?
You got that one?
Yes, yes, we do. With the MCs, you're going to do a lot of work with like your joint forces, especially with jumpers and teams, and it's great to really just see how they do it differently, but they're just so professional at the same time and so well organized. And it's like, okay, you guys got your piece, we got our piece, we're working together, and it's fun, honestly, just to see like how their mindset and how they handle business compared to how we do it.
Yeah, so one thing that's different about Air Force Special Operations, I joke we kind of have two parents. I've got Big Daddy Air Force and Big Daddy SOCOM. And so Special Operations Command. And I report to both at the end of the day. It can be a little confusing, but at least they co-parent well for the most part. And so what that ultimately means is SOCOM is a joint command. And so that has all the different branches. So you've got the Marine component of the Spec Ops, you've got the Army component, the Navy component, and the Air Force component. And we all work together under SOCOM. And General Fenton's our SOCOM commander down in MacDill, down in Tampa. And he's responsible for making sure that as a joint force, we're able to execute together. And so we are structured in a very unique way that we operate within those confines almost every mission. Like a routine training mission for me could involve dropping some special tactics dudes out the back of my plane, going up to Fort Campbell, doing a refueling mission, and then maybe carrying some. Fort Campbell's where the Army's Special Operations Aviation does some of their training. And so we may go up there, do, some rehearsals or whatnot, and then we'll come back and, land at Hurlburt Field, do some landings for pilot proficiency. So just lots of flexibility there with the joint partners.
So do you have any examples of working with any joint forces that come to mind, super memorable events?
Yeah, so I've done a couple exercises where we've been able to work with, some of the SEALs and some of the Rangers. For the most part, a lot of like stateside rehearsals, that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. And so, yeah, so you did mention that you work with the Navy SEAL. So what's that like?
It's pretty cool. They're absolute professionals. And so what's great about the special operations communities, we train exactly like we're going to fight.
Right.
And so there's, hey, there might be kind of smoking and joking going up, but as soon as the mission brief starts, absolutely focused on what matters, which is, hey, where are we going? Where are you going to, where's the drop zone at? Here's where I'm going to, tell you guys when to jump out. And so working with them, I've always enjoyed it because there's really no fluff there.
Right.
They're going to be absolute professionals every single time.
Master Sergeant Ervine, earlier you spoke about your mindset and how it was different working with people versus working with machines. As you progress through the ranks, how has your mindset or your attitude towards the Air Force changed over the years?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because it's almost the same as you progress in rank. You're very focused on flying, getting your hours done, going out and doing the missions, and wanting to be constantly involved. But as you progress in rank, you start to back away from being the one who's going out there and doing all that, and it's more about, okay, how do I take care of those who are my junior ranks? Mm-hmm. And again, that's a shift in mindset because you're not going to have that chance to be out there like, no, hey, you're a senior NCO now you have these responsibilities, it's just a shift of, okay, you're out, you're doing the mission, okay, now you need to come back You need to be ready to step in a role as a leader and focus on people. You're no longer that guy that's out there being the one executing the mission all the time. And that's how it should be. Like, hey, you did your experience, you did your time. Now we need you to step up and be a leader and to help your people. And it's the same shift from machine to human again, right?
Right. Similar question for you, Lieutenant Colonel Rourke. Slightly different. When you were a little bit more operational earlier in your career versus now being a little bit more managerial and even a little bit more spreading awareness and answering some questions, how has your job kind of changed and how have you handled that?
Yeah, I think day to day, you handle things better some days than others, especially when it comes to making sure that you're devoting time in the right place. I think the hardest thing for me is I'm a very tactile human being. I like doing things. It's why flying's great. There's a sense of accomplishment. I mission planned. I went out. I executed. I debriefed. I'm done. Once you move into a command type position and moving up the leadership change, your job is honestly never done. There's no like, okay, I took care of my people today. I'm good. Like, let's move on to the next task. And so that's kind of a mind shift. And so I joke, I'm definitely like a very reward based person. So I just write checklists for myself. I write down like, okay, here's my list and I'm going to check off things. And that way I at least can see some sort of progression throughout the day. And so moving away from focusing just on the mission, and now a good chunk of my time is focusing just on the people and then deferring to my DO, my director of operations, and knowing that she'll take care of the mission so that I can take care of the people, and realizing that we've got to delineate that. That's definitely been the hardest thing for me to kind of wrap my head around. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, going off that, for cadets hoping to pursue aviation in the Air Force, do you have any advice for them, or perhaps maybe one thing you wish you did differently on your journey to get to where you are?
Yeah. The best advice I can give is don't compare yourself to anyone else. Each day any student who's going through any kind of training, regardless of aviation, compare yourself to who you were the day prior. And so what happens in these, especially aircrew training pipelines, students get really wrapped around my class ranking, who's doing better than who, what assignments are out there. I feel like I was meant to go MC-130s, but I didn't get MC-130s right out the gate. It went to our number one guy. I was number 3. My path led me there ultimately. What's meant to happen is going to happen. And what I found when I was teaching at Pensacola is the classes that weren't focused on who's ranked where, what assignments, they actually almost all got assignments that they were happy with because they were tight classes and they got along. And those are the classes that have stayed friends years and years later, which is honestly more important than any kind of aircraft assignment.
Absolutely.
But the classes where they were fixated on, hey, I didn't get a perfect test score, or hey, how many downgrades did so-and-so get? And now they're wishing bad on their classmates, which happens. The instructors watch it. And it's very obvious. And you can see who's the team players and who aren't. And so I've seen instructors who have gone out and gotten assignments for people that they didn't need to do because there were so many awesome officers in that CISO training class.
Right.
Same thing at pilot training. So just focus on yourself, do the best that you possibly can, and then the rest is like whatever is meant to be will happen.
That's a great example and good advice. I think in ROTC, we run into that issue sometimes with cadets wanting to compare themselves to each other.
Yeah.
I know I fall into that trap often, trying to compare myself
How
to each
could
other.
you not?
You're just trying to track your progress. You want to get where you want to get. It's so competitive. It's pretty high strung too. And so you're all stressed out. Am I doing this right? Did this guy do this better than me? And it's stressful, and it's important to look back and say, you know, we're all on the same team and we're all trying to get better. So if I can help them out, then in the future, they're going to help me out. And by working together, we actually both might get better than if we were fighting against each other the entire time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's important, and it's glad to hear that that's something that you guys experience and that you guys work through and are able to come out the other side.
Yeah.
Talking about your training, you guys said you train exactly how you would operate. Whether it's this assignment or assignments you guys have had in the past, have you had any stories or any times where you've been operational downfield and been able to put all of that training to good use?
So we actually had a a fire break out on one of my aircraft, and we always practice emergency procedures and everything else like that. And so is that trained to where you can't fail anymore, right? Like I'm trying to fail, but I can't because I've just done it so many times. And that's why we train the way we do. So the second like this fire happened, it wasn't anything too big or crazy, but we lost about half the systems on the aircraft. It's like everybody immediately went right into their what we trained for, and it was like, okay, hey, I got this, you got this, here's our role, blah blah blah, and it wasn't a big deal. It was handled, and that's why we train the way we fight, because when that situation happens, you want to be prepared. So I mean, that's why you train the way you fight, because if you're like, well, I do this, and it's like, but that's not what we do. So when something happens, like, well, you're not going to be ready for it.
Not only do you want to be prepared, but you want to be able to trust in the people around you that they're going to do the same thing. They're going to keep a calm and level head, and they're going to operate and do their job. What is some of the biggest reasons that people have those characteristics? Is it because your training regimen is exactly how you would operate? Is that why they are? Is it because of the people that you're hiring, working around? What do you think that reason is?
It's a little chicken and the egg, right? So there's a certain kind of person that says, hey, I want something that's a little bit harder. Air Force Special Operations sounds cool. So there's a little bit of that. However, we also instill that culture. We call it ourselves Air Commandos. And the Air Commando essence, if you will, is just somebody who's constantly looking to improve the situation, improve the training environment, improve their circumstances around them, and look for a better way to do things. And so it's a little bit of both, for kind of an unsatisfactory answer, but it is that, like, not only are you kind of that way already, but then we make you more that way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right, so a little bit of a question for both of you. So as cadets that are still pretty much civilians, what would you suggest that we start implementing in our lifestyles now to really set us apart once we commission and get actually into active duty? Or maybe anything to cut out of our lifestyle?
Learning self-discipline, just learning regimented daily life schedules, and physical fitness. Physical fitness.
Appropriate physical fitness.
Appropriate physical fitness.
Mobility is huge.
Yeah. One thing that's like, AFSOC started standing up a human performance program, and the need for a lot of people, like, I want to bulk up, I want to get big and huge. It's like, okay, but are you taking care of mobility? Like, it's great if you can't scratch your back. Endurance, like, it's a holistic approach to your health, right? So not even just physical fitness, right? Sleep. Am I eating right? Am I sleeping right? Like, just building good daily life habits, like, is really important, because that's what's going to make you perform at your best, both mentally and physically.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So one thing I like to put a plug in for, like, nobody really talks about building your emotional intelligence skills early on. But when it comes to leading people and being self-aware, having those skill sets earlier on in your career, I think, is huge. And then I think another one's just having adequate coping mechanisms. So, try not to, if you're stressed out, like, come up with ways to mitigate that. I think that's being aware of yourself and recognizing when you're stressed out. And I'm still learning that, like, that's something that I wish I had paid more attention to when I was 20, 21. Like, hey, you're at your threshold for stress. What can we do to bring some of those stress levels down? But personality types, I'm like, no, we'll just compartmentalize those and shove those over here, and I'll deal with them when I'm 45 and out of the military. That's not healthy. So that's how you get gray hairs at 38. So, just, I think those are the plugs I have, is making sure you're not just taking care of yourself physically, but also developing that brain, and making yourself more of kind of an empathetic leader out there in general.
That's a good advice, and I think what you're getting at is there's a learning curve to multiple different aspects of being in the Air Force. You guys have had multiple different roles within the Air Force. What has been one of the most difficult learning curves, and how were you guys able to overcome that?
Say honestly, the first time leading people. So as air crew, the first few years you're kind of leading number one, and that's about it. Whereas, like, some of my friends who are maintenance officers, civil engineers, that kind of stuff, they're leading 100 people as, like, first lieutenants. And so my first time was as a flight commander down at Pensacola, where I was leading students, and just realizing, like, oh, I can't just, dismiss them or be overly harsh. Like, these are people's feelings I'm dealing with. And then there's all types of feelings, right? Like, what works with one person doesn't necessarily work with somebody else. Like I know I can be hard and disciplined on this person, but this person I need maybe a little bit more roundabout touch when it comes to giving them feedback.
One shoe doesn't fit all, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Got you.
So, as we near the end of the podcast, we always want our listeners to be able to get their questions answered. So, we've got a couple listener questions for you. You want to ask the first one?
Right, yes, sir, of course. So what's your favorite base you've been to?
Probably Okinawa, and it's close to being down at Herbert Field. I love fishing, and so the fishing out in Okinawa is just phenomenal. But being in the Gulf of Mexico, the fishing there is fantastic, and the mission on both bases are fantastic. So it's probably those two assignments, Herbert Field and Kadena and Okinawa, like those are tied with each other.
Right.
Teaching at NAS Pensacola was awesome. It's a beautiful base. Working with the Navy is pretty cool. People might have a tough time believing me, but from a mission standpoint, we're going to Cannon Air Force Base was actually pretty awesome. It's fairly remote. There's not a ton to do, but as a result, the squadrons are really, really close. And we got to know a lot of our community while we were there. And also, during there, I deployed, my husband deployed, we worked the Afghanistan retrograde. I mean, we got to do a lot in just 3 years, and that's something that was incredibly special. And so from a mission standpoint, Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, hands down, was actually a pretty big highlight.
New Mexico, that's
Yeah.
surprising. As a cadet, we don't really get a lot of New Mexico answers.
No, and you probably won't. And again, it's rural, there's cows, like if you're single looking to mingle, it's probably going to be tough. But from a mission, like it's a pretty awesome location.
The Southwest is also really beautiful, to
Yeah.
be honest.
Yeah, different kind of beauty from us East Coasters.
Yeah. So our second listener question is actually from a cadet at our detachment. We told them you guys were coming. We were fortunate enough to have you on your trip. It's a little bit of a two-parter question. You guys have visited multiple college universities, and we're fortunate to have you guys here. Could you explain the purpose of this trip? And our listener question is, which college has been the best that you guys have visited? You got to pick a favorite.
I was going to say, so we've been going out. We're honestly here just talking to you guys and teaching people about Air Force Special Operations. There will come a time, even if if you will never have a AFSOC assignment, you may lead people who you're like, you're looking for something a bit more. Have you thought about pursuing a base that has Air Force Special Operations and going and dabbling in that mission? And so I'm just here to encourage you guys to know about us and just kind of keep us in your hip pocket as you're leading people out and going forward. And obviously, I say you guys. I will say,
Aggie pride.
you guys have a fantastic detachment, and I can sense the pride that you guys have here, and that's pretty cool. I was gonna say, Travis, you want to piggyback? Or you
Yep.
good?
Nope, she nailed it.
Yeah, so any parting shots, any words you'd like to leave us with?
If you don't get the job you want, still be open to it. Like until you've actually done it, you don't know what you're getting into.
Right.
Like say it's not the job you want, and go into it like fully committed. Right? Some people will get jobs that they don't like, and they just develop this negative mindset, and they won't get the best out of it or the best out of them. So when you go into it, give it all, give it your best. Like you should do anything in your life that way, right?
Right.
And you may be surprised by what you discover about yourself in that career.
Right. So keep an open mind, basically.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
The biggest thing I have is keep hungry, keep being hungry. And so we get a lot of questions. I'm like, have you Googled that? And they're like, oh, no, I probably should Google that. Like, go out and do some research. Figure out what's out there in the Air Force. Because as Sergeant Ervine was saying, there are a lot of amazing jobs, and everyone has their place that they'll fit in.
Great. Well, we've got cadets that are interested in special operations, so I'm sure they would love to hear what you guys have to say, and our listeners and viewers may be interested in the future. If they have more questions or they want to reach out for more information, where can they find you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a AFSOC Outreach Instagram page and a Facebook page. You can start there. We've also you can Google AFSOC, and it'll take you right to our homepage where it explains all of our mission, our career fields, all that kind of stuff. And then you can obviously reach us through our socials as well with any questions you guys have.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much to the listeners for coming back for another episode. This has been episode 21 of the Screaming Blackbird podcast. Tune in next time, and we'll see you guys.
Thanks for having us.
See ya.
Cool.